Welcome back to another episode of Collision Repair Magazine's Industry Insider. Today we have Blair Earle, the Managing Director of IAA Canada, on the line. Thank you so much for joining us today, Blair.
Hey, thank you, Allison. We're excited to be here discussing the Canadian industry with our valued collision industry partners.
We appreciate it. Yeah, and I know you have a lot of experience in the industry, so we have a lot to talk about today. Stay tuned to hear about the latest trends and insights in the Canadian automotive industry. We're going to be diving into the world of used vehicle auctions, IAA's specialization here, wholesale vehicle values, new vehicle sales, insurance statistics, and very interestingly, vehicle theft and repossession trends, as I'm sure everyone's aware of Canada's current climate with that focus. So I'm your host today, Allison Rogers. I'm the editor of Collision Repair Magazine. Let's just dive right into our first segment here. Our first topic revolves around the dynamic world of used vehicle auctions. It's a very fast-moving pace, as all of the automotive industry is. So I'm sure all of our listeners on the line have wondered what determines the supply and demand for used vehicles in the auction market. So we're going to use Blair's expertise here. He's the managing director, as mentioned, at IAA in Canada. He's a seasoned expert in the automotive industry. So, Blair, I'm just wondering, to kick us off, can you shed some light on the current supply and demand dynamics in Canada's used vehicle auction market?
Hey, Allison, thank you. Yes, I can. And you know what? To start off, we'll touch on new vehicles in a moment, but every used car comes and is born out of the new car market at the top of the automotive funnel. And the supply and demand dynamic in the last 4 years have been pretty unique in the marketplace. We've never experienced it before. Currently, today, we're starting to come out of the challenges we had in supply. So on the supply side, we're seeing a flow of vehicles from trade-in vehicles as a result of some new product coming through in the marketplace. Lease returns that were extended through COVID are coming back to the market because those new vehicles have come in and people are replacing their leases, and fleet renewals. And in addition, I think we're going to see in the back half of 2024, rental car companies have greater access to new vehicles, which will produce more vehicles for the used car supply. I mean, in addition to all of those factors are on the demand side. You know, we now have 41 million people in this country has just been announced the last couple of days. The majority of those people are going to have transportation by car, and consumer confidence is another topic that affects the demand. So we've got interest rates, we've got job uncertainty, we've got mortgage rates, grocery prices, and the price of used vehicles to begin with. So there's many different factors on the demand side, and it's a snapshot in time right now in the Canadian marketplace. We're coming through a challenging side. Jumping back to the demand side for a minute, dealers are looking to replenish their inventories to meet this consumer demand. And we've seen a higher demand for reliable, fuel-efficient vehicles due to the rising fuel prices and economic uncertainty. And I think that's going to continue because Canadians are going to have a staycation this year, it looks like, and travel across Canada. And there's a big shift towards online auctions, allowing more buyers and sellers to participate, which affects the supply and demand dynamics. One of the big shifts in online auctions this year is that we've been acquired by Ritchie Brothers. It gives us expanded footprint across this country to be able to host more cars on our physical footprint.
Absolutely. I know in our conversations previously, you've discussed how the Ritchie Bros acquisition has really allowed you guys to focus on Canada in a different sort of light. And I know that a lot of our listeners probably are tired of hearing the word pandemic, but I'm just interested to hear how you think that the pandemic kind of shifted. I mean, you mentioned used vehicle prices have increased. You know, people are now looking to renew their fleets. How do you think that the pandemic has kind of shifted things and how we've come out the other side in terms of the IAA marketplace?
Well, if you think of all those used vehicles that were kept on the marketplace and being repaired and the demand for parts, the demand in our auction lanes, in our segment of the business, we've actually traded up and risen higher in the food chain in automotive. We've had a bunch of those used vehicles come back in all segments of remarketing, but also the insurance segment. So the volume in the auction lane has actually increased coming out of the pandemic, and the quality of the vehicle has increased, which I think we'll touch on in a moment.
Yeah, it's clear that there are so many factors shaping the automotive landscape and the auction landscape right now. And like I said, we don't want to just focus on pandemic, post-pandemic. Everyone's heard enough of that. So we'll touch on more about all of that. But I kind of want to get a definition of wholesale vehicle value index. It provides valuable insights to the fluctuating value of vehicles in the wholesale market. You touched on used car prices and the fleet renewals and everything just kind of affecting everything right now. And, you know, grocery prices too. Lots of things are expensive right now in this country. And I want to know, Blair, how does the wholesale vehicle value index influence decision making in the automotive industry?
So the wholesale vehicle value index is a crucial tool for understanding the market trend as you just described. It tracks the average prices of vehicles sold at wholesale auctions. It can fluctuate based on supply and demand, as we touched on, and broader macroeconomic conditions, as we talked about interest rates and inflation. For dealers and industry stakeholders, the index helps making informed decisions about inventory management, pricing strategies, and purchasing decisions. So dealers don't want to be carrying too much inventory if there's not enough demand for the product and paying for those vehicles. Dealers might need to adjust their acquisition strategies to be able to go up and down in that marketplace. And we've become a home for that. A declining index could signal an oversupply in the marketplace, leading to competitive pricing and opportunities for buyers. So at IAA, we keep a close eye on the leading wholesale indices for shifts in the market. For years now, we've seen demand in our lanes holding strong with less pricing fluctuations. It's mainly attributed to the wide array of product we offer at auction and the changing product mix. More interestingly, we're seeing more and more late model, low damage vehicles available at auction. And a good example, which we'll talk about in a minute, is the huge increase in theft, recovered, and repossession vehicles. That increase has taken off over the last 3 years.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Shifting a lot. I mean, we've got lots of demand, lots of supply, maybe depends on who you ask. But I see the age of vehicles is going up as well. That kind of affects the aftermarket, which is our primary audience here, that really touches on a lot of thought. Like you mentioned, you have to pay attention to this sort of fluctuating marketplace. So I thank you for demystifying the wholesale vehicle value index for us. And how important do you think it is that aftermarket players pay attention to something like this right now?
Well, the fluctuations in the marketplace are happening monthly, as I mentioned. So at IAA, we keep a close eye on the leading wholesale indices for shifts in the market. For years now, we've seen demand in our lanes holding strong with less pricing fluctuations. And that's been true over the last 3 years specifically. This is mainly attributed to the wide array of product we offer at auction and the changing product mix. So we're seeing more and more late model, low damage vehicles in the auction lane. A good example is the increase in theft recovered, to a certain extent, repossession vehicles. And you've seen a lot of, news across Canada about the theft vehicles and how that has increased over the past 3 or 4 years. That's become a major market for us.
Yeah, especially I think a lot of people have, it's not so much a misconception. You don't know where these vehicles are going after they're stolen, perhaps, but some people have this conception that they go onto some ship and then they're sent off to somewhere else that's, not North America. But clearly, in a lot of cases, they're just, gone to auction, as you mentioned. And then also the fact that a vehicle is stolen usually indicates that it's going to be going to somewhere wholesale. You never know what happens to that vehicle when it is stolen. So it ends up in the marketplace for auctions, correct?
Yeah, just to add a little bit of clarity to that too, there is a whole lot of misconceptions, and there's been a real focus on returning those vehicles to the Canadian market by law enforcement, and we've been asked to be a part of that. It's been a major growth in the auction lane, and we're getting those nearly new vehicles that have been stolen returning to the market and auctioned off because the consumer who had the vehicle stolen, they've received a settlement and they no longer want the vehicle back. They've already gone out and shopped for their new vehicle. So those vehicles are being auctioned off in our lanes and is really a great source of used vehicles in the market.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm sure a lot of listeners will be glad to hear that a lot of these are being recirculated back to the marketplace after they've been, looked at, made sure that everything's good to go and they're safe to still be on the road. They head back to IAA and everyone sorts out the issues there. But pointing out to the fact that you said you're getting a lot more of these newer vehicles in your possession, new vehicle sales are really the heartbeat of the automotive industry. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners have also wondered about the latest trends in new vehicle sales. You hear a lot about the used vehicle prices and not so much about new vehicle sales. Blair, could you kind of give us an overview of how new vehicle sales in Canada are impacting the auction supply and demand, the pricing trends, and including the split between, I think, particularly electric vehicles, EVs, and internal combustion engines, ICE vehicles?
I would love to. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart, especially in the Canadian industry. The funnel at the top for new car vehicles has taken a lot longer to grow in Canada. We were on track in 2019 to approximately sell 2 million new vehicles in the country. Not to bring up the pandemic again, but that dropped off, to the 1.5, 1.6 mark. And we're slowly getting back up and seeing growth in that, but we still be short of that 2 million car sold number on the new side this year. So when new vehicles for sales are strong, we see more trade-ins, which increases the supply of used vehicles. In Canada, we've observed a growing trend towards electric vehicles. Now, just lately, there's been a small decrease in the purchase of those electric vehicles. And part of it is some of the incentives have been removed in different areas and the pricing of those vehicles and also the availability of those vehicles. We think it's going to be electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles that are going to make up the difference in being able to get where we need to in the Canadian market. So this shift, it affects the used market as well, with more consumers looking for all sorts of vehicles, EVs, hybrids, and ICE engines. They still dominate the marketplace in Canada, especially in rural areas with both charging infrastructure. And because of our varied temperatures, I know we're going through a little bit of a heat wave right now at minus 40 with the humidex. But when we get into those minus 30 and 35s, the battery and those cold temperatures, it does affect the percentage of charging for the electric battery. And new vehicle pricing trends also play a role. Higher prices for new vehicles, as I mentioned, have pushed consumers towards the used market, which increases demand and potentially raising prices for these used vehicles. So we've got all these new people in the country. They need to have transportation, and we haven't been feeding the used vehicle market through the new car chain. So the demand for used vehicles and used parts, and our good partners on the non-franchise dealer side are the recyclers and the collision shops are still looking for those used vehicles and those used vehicle parts.
100%. I mean, not to bring a personal element into this, but I was recently exploring the used vehicle market and I purchased a used vehicle, and the prices, everyone knows this across the board, have really increased, post-pandemic, not to use that word again, but the market is definitely a lot different than we expected it would have gone in 2019. I think that really affects the way that things are happening. As you mentioned, the recyclers, the collision shops, they're really looking for these used parts. And a lot of the time, these used parts just aren't available, or they're going to be extremely more expensive than they were. So it's key that players like IAA bring into the marketplace the vehicles that you guys bring and all of the key insights there, because I think the average age of vehicles in Canada is between 11 and 13 years, which when you look at other countries, that's, I mean, not so much the United States, but when you look at other countries, that's quite a stark difference from some other countries in the world. 11 to 13 years is a pretty big gap from, say, somewhere in Europe or the Middle East or somewhere else that would be, somewhere between 5 to 8 years. It's a big jump.
You are correct, and that age of the vehicle has risen over the past 4 years in Canada and continues to rise. And part of that are all the factors we talked about. I mean, you're not going to see, a couple that's worried about making a payment on their mortgage and going out and taking a 9.9 interest rate out on a brand new car that's worth $60,000. So there's a lot of factors affecting the up and down in the trends right now. And I think we'll see stabilization as the flow of new vehicles comes through the market in Canada.
For sure, 100%. I want to touch on EVs because you mentioned EVs in your last answer here. EVs are quite a mystifying topic for plenty of our listeners. Any players in the aftermarket, a lot of dealers even are confused about it, recyclers as well. Not so much confused, I would say, but more they're willing to take on the challenge, but there is some, work that needs to be done there. And I think a big misconception that we get a lot of the time is that EVs experience a bigger total loss rate than ICE vehicles. And we'll get into kind of the insurance total loss ratio and everything in our next answer. But I just want to know what IAA's experience is with electric vehicles and what you guys have kind of been seeing in the Canadian market. As you mentioned, they're bigger here than in some locales. I know Quebec and BC both tout some of the highest claims on EVs in North America. When you're looking at Mitchell data or any data across the board, there's a lot of EV claims coming into these markets. And I think a lot of people think that, we see the stories on Rivian's small incident happens where the door is damaged or, if a side panel replacement or a grille replacement, and end up looking at a $55,000 repair bill. So I'm just curious to know for our listeners, what you guys have experienced in the EV market and the total loss ratio there.
I think a key thing you talked about there is the markets where those vehicles happen and the type of product and each individual model. So the sample size in some markets are still very, very small. But let's take BC for a minute. Tesla was the number one selling new vehicle in the Vancouver marketplace last year. So obviously, you're going to see more vehicles flow through in the total loss segment in that province, just on the number of vehicles that are on the road. I think right now the research is out that it's inconclusive. It depends where that vehicle's being hit. And there's so many different models that are affected by that and the total loss ratio. So it's not a massive difference in the percentages with the small sample size, especially as you mentioned in BC and Quebec. And I think there's a lot to follow on that as there's more research to be done. And the integrity of that vehicle is checked, and the integrity of that battery pack is checked on every vehicle before it is determined a total loss.
There's a lot of factors that go into play. And as mentioned, it's kind of a mystifying topic for a lot of us. And like you mentioned, there's not a lot of conclusive data on that to look at, but it's very fascinating to see the evolution of the market. And speaking to insurance total loss ratios, obviously insurance plays a critical role. A lot of our listeners deal with insurers on a daily basis. Obviously, that's the nature of our business here at Collision Repair. But have you ever wondered about the insurance landscape in Canada? It's a significant source of vehicles for IAA, from what I understand, comes from total losses declared by insurance companies. So, Blair, could you please elaborate on the total loss ratio in Canada and its implications for insurers and vehicle supply auctions?
I would love to, and it is an interesting topic. We get asked about it all the time at that summer barbecue as people have someone in the family get in an accident wondering why their vehicle was totaled. So insurers determine the total loss ratio. They compare the cost of the repairs to the actual cash value, and you'll hear ACV a lot. So that ACV is very important in the determination. If the ratio is between, for example, 70 and 80%, it can trigger a potential loss assessment. And the two likely scenarios that jump out to keep it pretty simple is, an obvious total loss where the cost of the repair is going to be more than the ACV of the vehicle. So if you've got a 2007 Grand Caravan and it's got $20,000 worth of damage on it, then it's pretty much a total loss. The second scenario is a constructive total loss. And that's where the repair cost is less than the actual cash value, but exceeds 70% of it. And that 70% for some companies can be 65, it could be 70, it could be 75%. But it's taking into account the salvage vehicle. So that's when you see the settlement and you'll get some questions asked. And there's a couple other factors that have come in the last couple of years. I mean, we're pretty much through the parts shortage, depending on make, model, and year. But the time it would take to get the parts in the repair vehicle could lean something over to be a total loss as well and a settlement. The total loss ratio is crucial in the insurance industry. It indicates the percentage of claims costs relative to the total premiums earned by the insurance company. So in Canada, the ratio fluctuates. Factors such as rising repair costs, new technology in vehicles and ADAS, and an increased frequency of accidents. In addition, the total loss ratio directly influences the supply of vehicles at auction. If you got a high total loss ratio, that means there's more of a supply coming into the auction lanes. And our good collision partners, whether they need the product for parts or the recyclers need the product for parts, or if the vehicle is being purchased and still is unbranded and the body shops can buy it and repair it and rebuild it and put it back on the road.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, vehicles are just getting more complex. You hear the term computer on wheels a lot nowadays, and there's more moving parts in EVs, like we mentioned before, than, the typical traditional ICE vehicles. And I'm curious to know, I mean, maybe we don't have enough concrete data on this, but in your opinion, Blair, and IAA's experience with the technological aspects rising in the vehicles and how complex repairs are, as you mentioned, measuring the premiums earned, the actual cash value, the ACV of the vehicle, and comparing that to repairs. I mean, you can see something like, just to throw out something, the Cadillac Lyriq has a digital grille. I always think, get a stone chip on that grille. That's a huge cost of repair. And that's just one of the ways you can reference how technologically advanced these vehicles are and how complex repairs can be. Hear a lot about replacement parts now, which is where IAA comes in key to replace the parts with the vehicles that you guys sell at auction. I know recyclers often use your services to source new parts, but I'm curious to know if you think the complexity of vehicles is going to increase the total loss ratio, or you think it's going to kind of eventually balance itself out. What are your opinions there from IAA's experience?
So this is going to be strictly opinion because there's smarter minds than mine that are digging into the data on this. One of the topics this week that I was very interested in the industry was the challenge of repair shops and frustrated with finding techs was the title. So I stopped to read the article and just the amount of technology that's still to come with autonomous vehicles. I think the trend is going to continue as total loss ratios are going to go up. And it could be the complexity in the glass. During COVID, there was a shortage of windshields with the proper technology to go in a number of makes and models. And the same holds true for bumpers and the technology that was and is needed in that. So my opinion is total loss will increase with the complexity and availability of parts and the amount of driving that's going to go on the roads. And I'm specifically talking about Canada. The Canadian consumer is not going to be in the air as much in international countries this year, according to all the reports. And if they're on the roads more, the percentage of those accidents are going to go up.
Yeah, the opinion there, it seems to, ring true to a lot of the things that we see in the marketplace, as you mentioned, the technician shortage, which is also a great opportunity, has been said, to kind of leverage how technologically advanced the industry has become as part of our sort of strategy to get more young people or burgeoning techs into the industry, highlight the fact that these are computers. You'd be working on computers basically. And as I mentioned, with complexity of repairs, a lot of the cars that IAA might see might have one part that's badly damaged, and then the rest of the car is perfectly intact and a great option for used parts.
100%. Yeah, 100%.
Perfect. Okay, so we're going to jump into our last segment now, which I think is a segment that a lot of our readers are keen to hear about IAA's experience, but it's around vehicle theft and repossession. These trends provide valuable insights into the security and financial aspects of vehicle ownership. Depending on the market you're in, you see a lot of news articles talking about stolen vehicles, depending on repossession in different climates. So, Blair, could you shed some lights into the current trends of vehicle theft and repossession in Canada? What shifts are you guys kind of seeing in the automotive wholesale market in IAA?
Thanks, Allison. Vehicle thefts, I'd love to come on here and say we're going to see a decrease in it. And apparently that's not the case if we follow the trend over the past 12 and 24 months in Canada, in major urban cities especially. We were just part of a police conference where they walked through all the new tactics. And as soon as they put a stop to the tactics that are happening, then the sophistication of these thieves changes and they do something differently to be able to steal vehicles. So it's going to continue to be on the rise, especially for high demand vehicles, whether it's import SUVs, pickup trucks, and premium vehicles. And they're on the rise, not just for the vehicle itself, but also for the parts. So the advances in vehicle security system, these thieves have outsmarted the security systems that have come into play. But this affects vehicle owners, impacts insurance premiums and resale values. And be very careful out there. I actually went out and purchased a club for a vehicle just to deter the thieves. And so they'd take a little bit extra and go on to the next vehicle if they were in my neighborhood. And that's some of the instances that the Canadian consumer has had to do, unfortunately. As for repossession in this country, we used to be pretty flat and not see repossession rates or percentages like the United States. But economic factors such as the interest rates we talked about, the unemployment rates play significant roles. We've seen an uptick in repossessions due to the economic pressures on consumers. And a lot of those repossessed vehicles, once they go through the waiting period, have been going through our auction lanes. So we've got an increased supply on vehicles, and almost new vehicles are going through the auction lane for lower prices. And we're getting lots of dealer attention for those vehicles. I think we're going to see that increase over the next 12 to 18 months. In Canada, we traditionally have, like I said, been very flat, but there's going to be extra repo product go through the Canadian marketplace.
Yeah, and I want to clarify one of your points there. This is my question I was going to ask as you're saying all of this. You kind of mentioned it here, but most of these vehicles that you see that are either repossessed or theft, as you mentioned, depending on your neighborhood, I know a lot in Toronto, we see a lot of theft. But is it mostly new vehicles, or who really has to be worried about this kind of issue?
It's actually mostly new vehicles. That's a great point. And luxury SUV, luxury import, and there's still a lot of stolen pickup trucks. There's a worldwide demand for pickup trucks. But if it's a nice vehicle, a newer vehicle, those late models are being stolen out of driveways, out of parking lots, and there's no slowdown in it. I think we all have to be diligent and be more careful and take some extra measures. And I think we're going to see the manufacturers in the future years even come out with more deterrence themselves in the production of vehicles.
Yeah, like as you mentioned, the security systems, the thieves have seemed to outsmart them in many elements. So I think, especially with the technological advancements, there's, automakers, OEMs are able to issue these updates for vehicles from the headquarters, and then, you just install it on your car. So hopefully we can see more theft deterrence because I know the government's working on it, everyone's kind of working on it, but sometimes things are a bit slow with that, and thefts are happening every single day. And, as you mentioned, pickups, the worldwide demand for pickups, and Canadians love their pickup trucks.
And this is, it's not a bunch of kids out stealing vehicles going on joyrides. This is quite sophisticated theft chains. And they've got the resources to invest in the next technology to be able to steal vehicles because it's such a lucrative market when you're talking about 70 and 80 and $90,000 vehicles.
hmm Yeah, and as you mentioned, it's not just kids. These are people, I don't want to give them the word businesses, but they've really created a lifestyle over making money from this market. And it's quite terrifying, honestly, if you look at some of the market changes. But I mean, there are certain ways that we can continue to serve this. But thank you for highlighting the crucial trends there. I think it's really essential for all our listeners to stay informed and vigilant about this, as beneficial as it can be for some of our businesses, getting these new vehicle parts or getting new vehicles back into the Canadian marketplace. It is quite a pressing issue that needs to be addressed.
You've got that right.
I want to, before we close off here, just as we're speaking about these trends and, consumers staying vigilant, there's obviously a lot of aftermarket players. You mentioned dealers. We deal with a lot of collision recyclers. So the key trends for the aftermarket, any closing words on people like collision repair owners, dealerships across Canada, recyclers, what do you think really is the key point here that they need to pay attention to in terms of the topics we've been discussing here today?
I think it's very important to be up to date on what's happening in the marketplace. And I think the Canadian industry, both collision, auction, new and used car sales, our recyclers, they are very current with trends that are happening around the world. And it's a daily source of information that comes out. Like I said, two pieces of information this week were the Canadian population and then the amount that people are going to stay in the country and drive. So we're going to need to continue to be a strong marketplace for parts for our key collision partners, sell the vehicles for the insurance industry and the remarketing industry and get those used vehicles back on the streets. I think our good friends at some of the other organizations, as they've picked up new car trends, they don't think we're going to get to 2 million cars sold in Canada till probably 28 or 29. So there's going to be that gap in the marketplace that used cars are going to have to stay on the road longer, be repaired, and fill the need of Canadian consumers until we get a full allotment into the new car lanes.
Yeah, so having a key partner in the industry, whether it be IAA or a different party, is extremely crucial. And, having those links to make sure that you are able to serve those used vehicles. Because, again, to bring a personal aspect into it, I had to, for my new to me used vehicle that I bought, I had to get a new part for it. And it's a 2012 vehicle, and it took quite a while to locate that part and figure it out. So it's really critical that in every market, you're paying attention to these kind of things and making sure that you have the availability and the options to get the parts that you need to satisfy the customers.
And as an industry, we're a big part of that infrastructure. It's critical that that marketplace continues in Canada and it is a source for parts for consumers such as yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah. And as you mentioned, the new population announcement this week, 41 million people in Canada, a lot of newcomers. Canada is a big, diverse market. There's a lot of different people coming in right now, depending on their economic status. They might be buying new vehicles. They might be buying used vehicles that are, say, 12 years old, like in my situation. So, making sure you're able to target all of those markets, depending on where you are and, paying attention to the market trends, as you mentioned, is really critical right now for all shops that really want to survive.
We'll keep those parts flowing through for the recyclers and shops to be able to keep you driving around, Allison.
Oh, perfect. Thank you, Blair. I really appreciate it. So, thank you so much for discussing all of these trends today. I think this is really beneficial information for our listeners here today. Any closing words here, Blair, to the industry?
I think it's very important that all the Canadian partners in the industry, we continue to communicate, review current trends. I know I go in and read the magazine every couple of days with the latest thing that pops up in my email box. And like I said, that article on the challenging piece about technicians, that was an education again for me because I was under the understanding that we were catching up. I understand that the problem is even bigger in the United States. So we're very happy to be part of Canadian collision industry and play our part in the infrastructure and keeping vehicles on the road.
We appreciate IAA's commitment to the industry and all of the issues that are being targeted right now. As you mentioned, we seem to be in a bit of a better position than our friends down south in the United States, but still there's a lot of work to be done. You've seen the uptick in technicians, the uptick in sort of people attending colleges and schools for collision repair and any sort of automotive aspect. So we thank partners from IAA and all of your insights here today, Blair.
Well, thank you very much, Allison. Really enjoyed it as always, and look forward to continuing to make this Canadian industry strong.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much to everyone who's been listening today. You can make sure to subscribe to the e-zine, as Blair mentioned, which gives you lots of insights in your inbox daily. We will include the link in the description below. And if you are keen to learn more information about IAA's role in the marketplace, please visit the link in our description down below. And I'm sure Blair would be more than happy to answer anyone's questions as well.
Yes, I will. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much to everyone for listening. And thank you again, Blair. Hope you enjoyed this episode.